farmers and shepherds and factory workers. They're jackaroos, aborigines, lifesavers and wharfies. We're scientists, miners, teachers and students. We're doctors and lawyers, businessmen and housewives, the people of a big, young country. Now stands where the first English settlers landed only 200 years ago. Sydney sprawls inland from a shoreline 180 miles long, which encloses one of the world's largest, safest and deepest harbours, Australia's busiest seaport. It's not easy to really explain Sydney, a big, beautiful, restless, robust city of 2.5 million people, who like most Australians are Welsh, Irish or Scottish ancestry. Sydney is many things. The cradle of Australians, the largest, oldest and most cosmopolitan city in the country. With its double-decker buses, the mellowing gold of old sandstone buildings, the glitter of steel, concrete and glass. It's the cool green of Hyde Park, shimmering statues, bubbling fountains, and children playing. It's the Royal Easter Show, a kind of fair on a national scale, where once a year people gather from all over Australia to see the latest products of Australian industry, to exhibit the best agricultural products of the land, to compete with each other in wood chopping contests or jumping events. Sydney is all of this and 1,000 things besides, all symbolised by the bridge spanning the harbour, the beloved bridge of every Sydneysider. 600 miles down the coast from Sydney is Melbourne, capital of the state of Victoria, home of 2 million people. Those who live here will tell you that it's the most cultured and quietly beautiful city in Australia. The River Yarra meanders through a city which prides itself on its parks, residential neighbourhoods and university. 500 miles from Melbourne, as the crow flies, is Adelaide, capital of South Australia, a city of 750,000 prosperous people. They work in shops and offices and provide all of the services to be found in any modern city of the world. They work in factories, producing more and more manufactured goods. 2 world wars brought rapidly increased industrialization, for Australia was forced to manufacture a wide range of products she could no longer obtain from distant Europe or America. Today, the 1 million and more tons of steel which this one mill produces will find its way into cars, appliances, locomotives, machinery of all kinds. The value of these manufactured products now exceeds the value of the products of the land, upon which Australia was almost solely dependent in the past. Nearly all Australians work for a living. There are few very rich or very poor people, and neither the rich nor the poor necessarily remain so. A man advances here strictly on his own initiative and ability. Everyone is treated as an equal. We're fiercely independent and hate to be told by anyone that we have to do something. We call our friends mates, and we believe that it's one of the worst sins to let them down. We're especially healthy, friendly and honest. We have strong likes and dislikes. We don't like a person who pretends to be something he isn't. And we like our leisure time. Some say we like it too much. We like the sunshine, which there's plenty of. Not a city in the country has fewer than 6 hours of sunshine a day throughout the whole year. To sit in your own yard on a Sunday with your family and friends makes for a good life. And we think we've got it. Football is a national craze. We're very enthusiastic about all kinds of sport. On Saturdays and holidays, the racetracks are packed. There are over 10,000 racehorses in the country. They're sculling on the rivers. And we're very fond of boats, either power or sail. Tennis is the most popular sport among players. And as schoolboys, we learn to play cricket. Many schools retain the English custom of uniforms. Education is free and compulsory. Schools are plentiful and good. We're a Christian country where everyone is entitled to practice his own religion in a completely free and independent nation. Australia is a member of the British Commonwealth. The Queen of Britain is also the Queen of Australia. Many of our fondest traditions are British, but gradually constitutional processes allowed Australia to gain her independence from Britain. From Parliament House in the national capital of Canberra, elected representatives administered the affairs of our democratic nation, close to Asia, but far removed from her sister islands of the Western world. It's more than 10,000 miles to Europe and 7,000 to North America. The continent is approximately the same size as the United States. Much of the land receives too little rain to make dense human habitation possible, and 2/3 of the 12 million people who live here dwell in cities and towns along the fringes of the continent, mainly near the east and southeast coast. Here, the climate and soil are good, and the rainfall sufficient for intensive farming. Most farmers live and work in this closely settled area. Less than 24% of the land area is suitable for agriculture, yet Australia manages to feed herself very well and has a considerable amount of food for export. Over 100 million bushels of wheat alone are exported each year, much of it to England. Much of the land on which agriculture is possible has infertile soils, but modern methods of fertilization are helping farmers to increase their yield. There is rich grazing along the fertile southeast coast, where the dairy industry is centred. Cattle breeds developed here in Australia produce great quantities of milk, butter and cheese. The orchards of South Australia produce fruit of all kinds. There's a long growing season and winters are mild. In Australia, snow falls only in the mountains. Grapes are harvested in March, for the seasons of this land below the equator are exactly the reverse of those in the northern hemisphere. That is, when it's summer in Australia, it's winter in Europe. Many of the orchards and vineyards of this area are owned and cultivated by Australians of German or Italian descent, whose ancestors brought the knowledge of fruit growing from Europe. So, most of the people of Australia live on the coastal areas of the continent, and most of the farming is done here. But beyond the mountains, which form the great dividing range, the land becomes less and less hospitable to man. The mountains there are old and worn by hundreds of centuries of erosion, mainly because there are few high mountains, and because Australia lies between the paths of the prevailing rain-bearing winds. About 42% of the continent receives only a slight and unreliable rainfall. Just enough for grazing. This is the land of the great sheep stations. Over 100 million sheep manage to find enough to eat on the sparse pastures. Many of the sheep stations have been occupied since the days of exploration, and their proprietors, called graziers, were once among the nation's wealthiest men. Many people think of life on such a country station as the best Australia has to offer. Australia's preeminent position in the world's wool market comes from a century of improvements of the sheep and land on such stations. The merino has been developed until he's now the world's finest wool producer. Graziers have improved the land by fencing the great ranges and providing them with artesian or underground water supplies. Some of the land is ploughed, fertilized and sown to improve the grasses. Many stations are hundreds of square miles in size, and children attend school right on the station. Sheep require a good deal of care. They must be separated into various groups and moved to different parts of the pasture. Much of the work is done by intelligent little dogs called kelpies. Sheep must be dosed at regular intervals to protect them from worms and disease. They must be dipped in a solution which protects them from insects, which might also damage the wool. Once each year, the shearing crews come to the station. Now, these are highly skilled piece workers who expect to be fed and housed like the kings of Australian labour, which indeed they are. With motor-driven clippers, they're marvels of speed and efficiency. A good worker will shear more than 100 sheep in 8 hours and may do 200 under exceptional conditions. The wool is sorted into varying grades. The clean inside wool and the longest fibres bring the highest prices. It is then pressed into bales, loaded onto the shipping dock, and trucked away to huge warehouses in the cities. Buyers representing firms all over the world examine it. Later, at auction, they will bid on wool they wish to purchase. Australia is the world's largest wool producer, exporting nearly half of the world's supply, though with the rapid expansion of mining, it's becoming less important to the country. Beef cattle graze where there is insufficient vegetation for sheep. This is the land we call the outback, the land of the immense cattle stations, some as large as 10,000 square miles. Life is much like that of the Old West in America. Limitless land, long, hard, hot days for the drovers. Beef is butchered to take along for the long days ahead on the track. It'll be months before these drovers see station headquarters again. They may be 1,000 miles from a slaughterhouse and hundreds from a railway. Every 50 miles or so along the track there's water and some kind of campsite. Windmills pump the water from deep pools in the earth which underlie parts of Australia. Much of it is salty and suitable only for cattle, but this is cool, clear water. Life itself for man and animals. They are hardy people, these men who endure the hardships of the outback. All the strength and courage and determination of the pioneers who not so long ago first opened this land. Many Aborigines find work on the cattle stations. Stock work is one of the only occupations they like and seem suited to. The Aborigines of Australia are believed to be the oldest living species of man. Many authorities believe they're descended from early Asian tribes who spread to Australia many thousands of years ago. The Aborigines are perhaps the most primitive people in the world. In their native state, they do not till the soil, herd animals, or build dwellings. Many still prefer makeshift shelters to living in houses on government or mission reservations. The government is trying to educate the 47,000 Aborigines, many of whom still live here in the outback, trying to integrate them into Australian society. But the difficulties are great and the progress slow. The teachers who work here are truly dedicated. This is the Aborigine's own country, the land he knows, for only he has learned to survive on this vast plateau of 1 million square miles stretching endlessly across the interior. 34% of the continent is parched desert, land with little or no rain, a desert of stark and forbidding beauty, a country of red mountains, brown rocks, green scrub, and ghostly white gum trees. The scanty rainfall evaporates almost as soon as it falls. This desert will yield nothing to man's labors and will even snatch away his life if he ventures into it unprepared and unwary. Alice Springs, the very center of the continent, the only place in this desert where there are many people. Water is found in the nearby McDonald Ranges and stored in tanks for the people who live here. The Alice, as we call it, isn't much of a size, but it's all there is for 1,000 miles in any direction. Isolation and loneliness are problems of much of the outback. But radio and the aeroplane have done much to ease the hardships of the people who live here on one of the world's last frontiers. Planes make regular calls to the widely scattered stations to deliver mail and passengers. The Royal Flying Doctor Service exists to answer radio calls for help in the event of illness or accident. Planes are dispatched either to take a doctor out or bring a patient back. The planes sometimes fly hundreds of miles over treacherous and forbidding wasteland. A grateful patient is brought back to the Alice, where there is medical care available. And a bush pilot, one of the real heroes of the outback, can relax. Australia is the oldest of continents. The land was formed over 1,500 million years ago. Although nature has been harsh in many respects, she has been bountiful in others. There's an extraordinary variety of bird life, about 700 types, including the strange-looking emu, a bird who cannot fly. There are 400 kinds of animals, most found nowhere else in the world, like the koala bear, who spends most of the day sitting in the fork of a tree sleeping, or gazing down on the world with a surprised expression. And of course the kangaroo makes only Australia his home. Nature has been generous in providing mineral wealth. There are large deposits of zinc, copper, iron, silver and gold, and plenty of coal to power industry. Since uranium was discovered in the Northern Territory, extensive surveys have been constantly undertaken to determine the extent and quality of this uranium-bearing earth. Diamond drills bore into the ground to help locate the richest veins of ore before the shovels and trucks move in to begin large-scale excavation operations. This resource, now being developed, may well be the means of bringing people and capital to the northern lands. Enough money to invest in industry and development of resources, and enough people to do the work, are two of our greatest needs, along with the need for water. We're working hard to solve these problems. Gigantic dams and hydroelectric projects are underway to irrigate and power millions of acres. Scientists are working on ways to retard water evaporation, for even in those parts of Australia where there's an adequate rainfall, it doesn't remain on the ground, but evaporates very quickly under the clear, hot sun. Foreign companies are helping to provide the needed money for industrial expansion and are spending large sums on the construction of new facilities, which will mean jobs and goods for Australians. The government encourages immigration and even pays the cost of transportation for these new Australians who will help provide a sufficiently large market for the products of industry. New Australians bringing with them the skills and customs of their native lands to help develop and enrich this seriously underpopulated nation. We're farmers and shepherds and factory workers. We're jackaroos, aborigines, lifesavers and wharfies. We're scientists, miners, teachers and students. We're doctors and lawyers, businessmen and housewives, the people of a big, young country. Now stands where the first English settlers landed only 200 years ago. Sydney sprawls inland from a shoreline 180 miles long, which encloses one of the world's largest, safest and deepest harbours, Australia's busiest seaport. It's not easy to really explain Sydney, a big, beautiful, restless, robust city of 2.5 million people, who, like most Australians, are Welsh, Irish or Scottish ancestry. Sydney is many things. The cradle of Australians, the largest, oldest and most cosmopolitan city in the country. With its double-decker buses, the mellowing gold of old sandstone buildings, the glitter of steel, concrete and glass. It's the cool green of Hyde Park, shimmering statues, bubbling fountains, and children playing. It's the Royal Easter Show, a kind of fair on a national scale where once a year people gather from all over Australia to see the latest products of Australian industry, to exhibit the best agricultural products of the land, to compete with each other in wood chopping contests or jumping events. Sydney is all of this and 1,000 things besides, all symbolised by the bridge spanning the harbour, the beloved bridge of every Sydneysider. 600 miles down the coast from Sydney is Melbourne, capital of the state of Victoria, home of 2 million people. Those who live here will tell you that it's the most cultured and quietly beautiful city in Australia. The River Yarra meanders through a city which prides itself on its parks, residential neighbourhoods and university. 500 miles from Melbourne, as the crow flies, is Adelaide, capital of South Australia, a city of 750,000 prosperous people. They work in shops and offices and provide all of the services to be found in any modern city of the world. They work in factories, producing more and more manufactured goods. 2 world wars brought rapidly increased industrialization, for Australia was forced to manufacture a wide range of products she could no longer obtain from distant Europe or America. Today, the 1 million and more tons of steel which this one mill produces will find its way into cars, appliances, locomotives, machinery of all kinds. The value of these manufactured products now exceeds the value of the products of the land, upon which Australia was almost solely dependent in the past. Nearly all Australians work for a living.